First, just a quick question, because you've all started your groups now. Any comments on how the group has been, or at least group meeting number one?
Pretty good. Yeah. It's nice to have a smaller group and start to talk and
Yeah.
get to know each other at a deeper level.
Okay.
I felt like I learned a lot, and I zoomed in and even felt like I learned a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Your group was live, but you zoomed in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was out of town. Tay just taught us so much, and it was really valuable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Other thoughts? I know you have thoughts, so you don't have to.
I enjoyed it. I think it was mostly just kind of a relief to have have the first one under our belts and
Yeah.
realize like, okay, this is what's happening. These are the people.
Because it's hard to picture what this is really going to be like. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any of you go first? Were any of you yeah? How was it for you being the client?
It was very good. I think I've been in counseling before, so it wasn't new to me.
Okay.
But
That's good. It's probably good to start with somebody who's been in counseling. Yeah.
So like, even though it was a group session, I think I had a lot more takeaways than I expected.
Okay.
So it was helpful for me as well.
Okay. All right. Good. Hey, guys. All right. Let me pray for us and we'll start. I'm going to try and watch the clock a little better tonight. So let me pray. Father, these are attempts of ours to understand the way you want us to treat each other and the way you want us to understand what's going on inside of us and inside of others. It's an attempt to capture how the Spirit might use community or use relationship to help us get unstuck. I just pray that you would protect us tonight, your Spirit would be present, that your Spirit would be the primary teacher and the person who knows how to apply whatever is said today to our particular circumstances. So I pray for all of us that we can find rest here and sort of give up the rest of our lives for the next 2 hours and trust you with it and try to be as present as we can. And we ask that your Spirit would just do what sometimes your Spirit does and sort of overrides our humanity and brings something unique and memorable to a conversation. So bless this time. We give it to you and pray in Christ's name. Amen. So brief reminder, 2 weeks ago, we introduced the model. If you remember, it's pretty simple, just 4 stages. The first one is what we're calling assessment and rapport, or what we'll call empathy tonight. The second stage is the tinkering, and that's the second talk tonight. Just so you know, we don't actually get to the third stage until the 9th talk. So that's the what we're calling major change. And then the last one is the last talk, and that's on termination. So in between, so after tonight, the next talks 5, 6, 7, and 8 all fit in this model into this box here. So we're going to talk about gender. We're going to talk about childhood suffering and early trauma. We're going to talk about exposure and resistance. Part of the placement here, so obviously you could get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 talks and get the model. But in order to really, I think, make progress with people in this model, you have to be able to navigate and know what to do with the concepts of gender and with the concepts of suffering and what's going on in the background of someone's life. You remember the Johari window question and the question that'll save your marriage, what's it like to relate to me? And for us to really understand how people relate, at some point, we have to, not always, I mean, a lot of counseling is fairly immediate, fairly situation specific. You don't have to know a person's story or background. But with more complicated presenting issues and more complicated relationships, we often delve into the person's story. And to know, I love the title of this book. It's one of the books we use in the classes that we teach. It's Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's What Happened to You. It's just a very simple description, a way of understanding how trauma affects us. And they titled it that way because they're aware so many people go through trauma and end up asking the question, what's wrong with me, instead of what happened to me. So I actually think, just a pitch for that book, if you want to, I think just reading the book immediately gives you more empathy for people, especially people who are hard to like or hard to get along with, people that have edgy or defensive styles of relating because of how they grew up. And it just helps to have other ways to develop empathy for people that you don't like, or you don't have much in common with, or you don't understand. And to have empathy, you can tell from reading the manual, it's not hard to have empathy for people who are like you. It's not hard to have empathy for people who are really open and inviting and relatively non-defensive. But look, all of us are difficult at times in our life to have empathy for. And some people are pretty consistently hard to have empathy for. I asked Debbie to look up a movie on the way here because that just popped into my mind, because sometimes watching films or reading stories actually gives you empathy that you're not seeking, because it gets you behind the screens to the why people do what they do and why they think what they think. This movie's from, I forget, 1980 something. Yeah, it stars William Hurt, and he plays a really arrogant surgeon in a hospital, and he treats patients abominably and doesn't care. He's just, he's a craftsman. He's a renowned surgeon, and he doesn't care how he treats you or how you feel about him. He's just here. You're basically an automobile that he's trying to fix. And it comes across very clearly in the first 20 minutes that he's just an arrogant jerk and has no empathy for the people. And you can imagine they show him going home to his wife and his kids, and he's not a whole lot better in his home. And what happens, the turning point in the movie, about, I can't remember, but maybe a half an hour in, he gets diagnosed with pretty extreme cancer and becomes a patient on the oncology ward. And all of a sudden now he's in the patient's position. And he starts, and he's scared and anxious. And you can see as doctors come in and nurses come in to treat him as a patient, of course he's trying to boss him around and use his weight, and they're not buying it. And he realizes, I don't know what to do with what's happening inside me. I'm out of control, and I've been in control my whole life. And he starts to, in a good way, starts to come unglued, but it's really hard for him. And another cancer patient just recognizes the signs of what he's going through and befriends him. And the heart of the movie is this relationship with this woman who's dying of cancer, and her ability to essentially help him see how to be more human and how to have empathy. Like, for a lot of people, it's just not natural to think about what other people are feeling or going through, because we're so locked in on our situation. I had a client this week. She's a mom of, she's got 2 kids. One, her son's in college and far away, and she's got a daughter in high school. Last fall, her husband assaulted her, and it led to a police report and then a separation, and now she's in the middle of pursuing divorce. And the husband's, he came in once for counseling in the fall before this all happened, and admittedly, very hard to have empathy for him. He was arrogant and defensive and dogmatic, and basically his whole stance was, is this hour over yet? Like, I'm just here because she wanted me to come, thinking counseling would help, and you could tell his attitude was, nothing's going to help. And he was increasingly hiding things from her, financial things and stuff like that. Well, after this police episode, then he started moving money and really sequestering a lot of their possessions and things like that. So she moved out. They sold their house, but the daughter, the high school daughter, was really obviously caught in the middle. And she actually was closer to her dad, is more like her dad. And her dad, not unusual, paid more attention to her than to his wife. So there's a little bit of what we would call a triangle going on there. And the daughter was torn once they were moving and finding different places to live, and the daughter waffled back and forth. The son, who's closer to the mom and is sympathetic to the mom, but also decided, I'm not getting in the middle of this. I'm far away, and I don't want to pick sides. Well, the daughter decided, I'm going to live with dad. And the mom, trying to take care of her daughter, didn't reveal a lot of what happened. So the mom got this 3-bedroom apartment and lives in it alone. And she literally hadn't seen her daughter for 3 months since they got the apartments. And she was just distraught because the daughter had really just shut the door on the mom. And a week ago, the daughter called and said, can we get coffee? And of course, the mom was like, yes, let's get coffee, let's get dinner, let's get breakfast, she just wanted to connect. She wanted to be back in relationship with her daughter. But she has a cousin who's been through this, and the cousin was like, and actually her son, same thing. They both said, no pressure. Don't ask for anything. Don't expect much. Just go in low key, which was really hard for this woman. I mean, you can imagine if you're a mom, you're just like, are you kidding me? I've got a chance to see how she's doing and find out what's going on, but also see if I can understand why she chose to live with him and what he's telling her. And I mean, she has all kinds of questions. So she goes into this, she finally talks her into dinner instead of coffee. And she has all these questions, but she's got these voices in her head saying, just keep calm. Don't push. Don't try to get your answers. And so she just had to bite her tongue a lot. And she said it was a pretty normal conversation. And at the end of it, her daughter said, maybe tomorrow night I can spend the night. So inside she was like, oh, I'm making some progress. And when the daughter came, though, she started waffling back and forth about whether she wanted to stay and whether, you could tell that being around her mom and sensing that, like, again, the dad, from what we can tell, has been painting this horrific picture of the mom. And she's trying not to, this is not an unusual divorce scene, she's trying not to tear down their picture of their dad. And part of what she said, because the daughter finally came, I think the son talked to her and gave her some of the details. And so she came in at dinner and said, I have questions for you. I want to know why you didn't put him in jail. If he really hurt you like that, why didn't you put him in jail? And she didn't want to give all the details, but she said, I didn't think you'd want your dad in jail. And I thought it could affect us financially. So she's trying to say, I'm trying to make good choices that protect all of us and protect your relationship with your dad and don't end up hurting. In essence, we would say she's trying to not to fight fire with fire and, exact any kind of vengeance. But the daughter was, again, you could tell the daughter wasn't super happy about that. So the daughter waffled back and forth and did spend the night, and then went back to her dad's after that. And so she came in to say, what do I do now? And I said, what are you hoping for? What do you want to do? What are you feeling? So she got all that out. And she said, I just have so many questions, and there's so much I want to understand, and so much I want her to understand. And I need to know how to get her back. If you have ideas, like I know she was coming in saying, do you have ideas for how to get my daughter back in my life? Which I don't fault her for that. Point A, point B, I want to restore the relationship with my daughter. And I said to her, I said, how much empathy for your daughter do you think you have? And she looked at me kind of blankly, like, I think her first answer in her head was, well, I have a ton of empathy for her. But she understood there was something in the question where she was like, what do you mean? And I said, and I do this sometimes, you'll hear this in the tinkering part. I said, I want you to pretend you're not the mom, but you're your daughter's counselor. And your daughter comes in to tell you what's happened in her family and what she thinks and feels. and the choices she's wrestling with. And it was hard. I mean, this is a very, giving and probably a little too over the top, controlling, probably mom, but it was really hard for her. You remember what we said 2 weeks ago? Counseling is easier if you can empty yourself of your own agenda. Empathy is really hard to do if you can't empty yourself of your own emotions, your own anxiety, your own need to prove yourself or perform or defend God or defend the church or convert all those agendas that we have. Crabb and Allender said, leave all that at the door and just be as present with somebody. So I was trying to coach her. Can you be empathetic to your daughter? And I said, what do you think your daughter would say if you were the counselor and you said, how's all this been for you? And you could see the light bulb go on. And she said, oh my gosh, she really does not know what to do here. She doesn't know who to believe. She doesn't know what's the right choice about where to live. She realizes, I said, what do you think your daughter thinks her choices are? She said, I think she has to either pick sides or do what her brother's done and try to just check out and stay out of the middle, or try to negotiate and play the go-between between her parents. She goes, and this mom playing the counselor was like, those were all lousy choices. I said, exactly. How do you think she feels? Incredibly alone. And she realized when they went to dinner, she said, my daughter ate 2 entrees and a whole loaf of bread, which made her think, is he not feeding her? Is he just, like, she doesn't know, and the daughter wasn't confiding, but she just realized all the signs to her affected her. She was reading how it all affected her. She wasn't reading, what do these signs tell me about what's going on in my daughter? And just the simple idea of, can you put yourself in this person's place? Can you understand what she's going through? So it just happened to be this week. I chuckled to myself because, of course, I'm going over all this content on empathy, and this situation comes in, and it felt like, okay, I got all this empathy stuff fresh in my head, so let me pitch it here. And it just made a difference. She, once she started processing it, she's like, oh my gosh, this is so good for me to do. It'll help me from doing what I feel pressured to do. I feel desperate to do. And this gives me a counter for that, a way to handle her differently and more slowly and more quietly. All right, so we'll talk more about empathy in a minute, and then we're going to go to tinkering. I just want to remind you of the model. I also want to make sure, I didn't mention this last week because I ran out of time. And I believe this is in the manual, but in the Crabb and Allender program, we got a very simple picture of human nature. And it was actually Dr. Crabb's answer to the question, how are we like God, or how are we made in the image of God? And his answer was that we are personal beings with an identity and a sense of self. We are rational beings with the ability to think and connect the dots and solve problems, and also imagine things and create things. We are volitional beings, meaning that we have the ability, because of free will, we have the ability to set goals and choose paths and react to things and make decisions. And we are emotional beings, meaning that we are created with this vast array of emotional capacities. All of which, and he was saying, is because God displays himself as being intimate and personal. He reveals his creativity and his logic, if you will, or his beliefs, or what he says is true or not true. Clearly, God makes choices and is operating out of free will and has motives and behaviors that he engages. And clearly, and this is the interesting thing, because I think we often miss this, the Bible actually portrays the entire Trinity as being quite emotional, which is a little hard for us because I think we can get stuck on the God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, as if he's sort of this static fixed entity, like he's always the kind Santa Claus, or he's always the angry, God of thunder, or he's always the judge, or he's always just a dispassionate watcher, or all kinds of things where we sort of lock God in and we don't think how, at least in time, in the world we live in, he expresses himself as being quite emotional. The Old Testament in particular is a very emotional up and down relationship that he has with the children of Israel. And at times, he just explains, like the beautiful passage in Ezekiel 20, where, particularly in the Message, where God says 3 times he's telling Ezekiel about his history with Israel, particularly coming out of Egypt. And 3 times in chapter 20, he says, they completely ignored what I told them to do. They ignored my advice. They did what they wanted to do. They worshiped false gods. They forgot everything. And he says 3 times, and Peterson's just good at using modern language. He said, I just wanted to let them have it. I wanted to pour out my wrath on them. He sounded like a really angry parent. Like, this kid is driving me nuts, and I want to let him have it. And that's how it reads in Ezekiel. But what he says to Ezekiel is, but I wanted to pour out my anger, but I thought better of it. And he says, I thought of who I am and not how I feel. And I thought of the nations around my people watching how I treated them. And that's the theme in that particular chapter of Ezekiel. It's a really, and I read it, I think the first time I came upon it, we had teenage sons. And immediately I thought, you get it. You get how it feels to be a parent of somebody that you can't, you've lost control, and they're making their own decisions. So this is how Crabb says, this is how God is, this is how we are. There's a whole lot more on the circles. Again, it may be in the manual. The reason I'm bringing it up right now is it's helpful both in terms of assessment. So when someone's coming in for counseling, they're going to talk about symptoms, and they're going to talk about relationships, and they're going to talk about circumstances out here. That's how most people come into counseling. And then frequently, people are going to talk, or you'll pretty quickly ask some form of, so how do you feel about that? Or what are you feeling about what's happening in your life? So you're going to get an emotion. Then you're going to ask the question in the next ring in. So this is the emotional circle. This is the volitional circle. And in his theology, if you will, he sort of says the volitional circle has 2 parts. And the first is the actual behavior. So if someone comes in, like this mom comes in, and what she's saying is, I want to shower my daughter with affection and try to persuade her to come move in with me, and try to not dishonor her dad, but say that maybe you'll feel more comfortable, or I'll be more responsive. She wanted to, pitch a sales pitch to her daughter. That's what she wanted to do. That was her behavior. The inner part of this circle is, what's your motive? What are you hoping to accomplish by your behavior? That's an important concept to understand in counseling, because when we get to tinkering, you'll see often when people explain what they did in a situation, it's going to be pretty normal for you to say, what were you hoping would happen when you did that or said that? Now, most of us, what Crabb argued is that most people, not everybody, a lot of people are they're very aware of this. That's what brings them into counseling. I have symptoms, I have relational problems, I have circumstantial problems, or I don't like how I'm feeling. And everybody can come in and to some degree describe, and here's what I'm doing about it, or not doing, or think I should be doing, or feel pressure to do, or feel guilt doing, or feel ashamed of doing. It gets a little muddier when you begin to ask, do you know what your motive is? Do you know what you're actually working towards or hoping for? And have you thought about how that behavior and that motive affects the other people? Again, that's what just happened with this woman. Inside here is the rational circle for all of us and for your clients. And that is, behind motives and goals and emotions is a belief system. And again, there's two pieces to this. The outer ring is what we actually is sort of our cognitive beliefs, or our what we say we believe, what we think, what we would sign on a piece of paper, not necessarily a doctrinal statement, but this is what I believe about life, about relationships. This is what I've learned. This is what has been given to me, and I can spout back out. So we all know how to talk about our belief system, whether it's in a religious sphere or just in a personal sphere or a job sphere. You have strategies for work and strategies for taking care of yourself and strategies for relationships you're in. All of us do. And those strategies are based on certain beliefs and opinions and rights and wrongs and your own set of commandments and you know, highly effective habits, or take your pick on all the behavioral advice we get. Interestingly, in the inner circle, from Larry's perspective, this is where our imagination lives. Underneath what we say we believe, we have more profound images of ourselves, of other people, of situations, of God. And his point here, even when children are little, before kids can talk, before they know language, they're already forming visual ideas or visual scripts about how to navigate life. They're learning, like you can imagine, most kids by the time they're 2, certainly 20 years ago, they know what to order, they know what to do at McDonald's, even if they can't talk. Nowadays, you can see 2-year-olds that know how to navigate screens, but they couldn't tell you what they're doing. They couldn't tell you where the images they're looking at come from. They have no rational understanding of what they're looking at, but they have learned, they've watched and seen things, because we're so visual and we're so imaginative, that imagery actually takes root way before we have language to try and explain it. And this is often why when people are trying to change what we cognitively think, if we don't get to the imagery, we're bouncing off. Like, yes, I can believe, like Debbie and I are listening to a book, The Woman Who Could Not Be Silenced. And it's basically a long court record of a woman who was in the 1860s, whose preacher husband had her committed to an insane asylum because she started expressing her beliefs and her thoughts and wasn't docile or submissive. And apparently that was very common in the mid 1800s, which sounds very much like some of what you hear about New Testament times, the way women were treated. They're not allowed to testify in court. They're not viable witnesses, and they don't have a voice. And so you can see how now if you're reading a book like that and then you come to a church that's really preaching hierarchy, I hope I'm not stepping on toes, hierarchy, of the man is the head of the house and the woman should submit to the husband. If you're reading a book like that and then you hear that being taught, you can understand the tension. That's the tension you're going to feel. Like, wow, I just read an entire book and historical record of how abusive that kind of system can become. And so that because that book paints such vivid images, it's actually hard to then subscribe to the theology of hierarchy, because now you got a class between what you're feeling and seeing and reading about and what you're being told to believe. So we all know what that tension is like. And then in the middle here, this is what he calls the personal circle. And this is probably the hardest one to really get a grasp on, but let me just put it this way. What he's saying is each of us has a profound sense of who we are. It's more than identity, but it's also how, in simple terms, how much I like myself or don't like myself, how much shame I feel, how much freedom versus stuck or trapped or limited, how much of a sense of role or purpose I have versus the more negative sense of I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I'm just maybe not skating through life, but I'm certainly bouncing from one thing to another, one relationship to another, because I don't really know. I'm not grounded inside. So that's a theology of human nature. The reason I'm putting it back up, it's really helpful in the assessment phase to get a sense of what are the emotions this person is sharing? How in touch with their emotions are they? Can they identify what they're feeling? It's not unusual to ask somebody like, if Hunter, you were my client, and I said, well, how are you feeling about your job these days? And Hunter goes, okay. Anything more than that? Not really. I don't know. I can't think of anything. That's not an unusual answer, where we just kind of open the emotional room and there's a shelf in there, emotions about work. You go over to that shelf and you go, no, I don't see anything. So the common answer we give is, I'm all right, or I don't know, or no big deal, or it's okay. All those kinds of things. And it either means I'm not telling you, or I really don't know, which means it's unexamined. And in this terminology, it means I'm feeling things, but I'm not aware of the feelings, or I don't know how to label them. And Crabb would go so far as to say a healthy emotional circle means you know what you're feeling and you can label it accurately. A healthy volitional circle is you know what you're doing, you report it honestly, this is what I did. And if you're really good, I think this is what I was trying to do. I think I understand my motives. If you ask a little further, why is that what you're trying to do? Now you're getting into the rational circle. Do you understand where the need, like this mom, you're mothering a certain way. Do you know where that style of mothering came from? Where did you learn that style of mothering? Now that's getting into history, but it's also getting into, are you aware of the belief structure in here? And even more, are you aware of the things that happened to you, the stories you've experienced that visually and imaginatively shaped how you see parenting? And then do you see, in this case, I think this woman would say, I see now that part of the problem is that in my deepest core, I don't feel good about myself if my daughter doesn't want to be with me. So my personal circle, it's a little bit of pretty common codependence. I don't feel good about me if you don't feel good about me. Does that make sense? So I just think, again, this is the manual. It's helpful to have a grasp on those circles. Now, if you've read the tinkering chapter, you know that there's a couple pages on how you tinker in each one of those circles. So how do you tinker with somebody emotionally, rationally, volitionally, et cetera? All right, quick question here for the group, which may be edited out for the screen here, but I want you to just shout out loud. I'm not sure I'll get everybody, but empathetic people are what? Said good listeners. Yeah. What else? Curious. What else?
Sensitive.
Say it again.
Sensitive.
Sensitive. Which definition of sensitive? Because there's two definitions.
Like in touch with emotions.
Okay. All right. Hopefully you have empathy, or you have empathetic people in your world. You can describe them. What else would you say?
Not judgmental.
Okay. Okay. Say it again. Patient. Very good. You get it, right? I mean, you could go on and on. Is there anyone in the scriptures that immediately jumps to mind, other than Jesus, when you think of this is an empathetic person in the Bible? Sorry, Lord, we can't think of anybody. Say it again.
Elizabeth?
Elizabeth? With Mary, you mean? Okay. Excellent example. Because, but what, elaborate just a little more. I think she's empathetic because,
He saw her. She was seen and she was safe.
Yeah.
And he
Okay.
soothed.
Yeah.
Because of Elizabeth's presence.
Yeah. And she believed her. And a lot of that.
With
Yeah. Excellent example. One more.
Jonathan?
Jonathan, because? There it is, the rational circle with a, I don't have an image. The name just popped into my head. Somebody,
Well, there was the verse he loved them as they were good friends, so there had to have been some sort of rapport there, but I can't.
okay, anybody help her out? Why Jonathan's a good answer? Go ahead.
As the son of Saul, his motive could have easily been like, I don't want to help him out. But he was
Right.
very, even with that, he just loved him as a brother and a
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Like that.
Again, like this daughter, he made a choice. He could have been in the middle. He could have just stayed out of it. He chose a side. And he chose to help David at the risk of alienating his own father because of what he felt for him, because of his connection to him. Okay. Reverse question. Non-empathetic people are, it's going to be, don't just say the opposite, impatient, judgmental, bad listeners. What else comes to mind? Non-empathetic people are,
Checked out.
yeah,
Dismissive?
yes.
Self-centered.
Say it again. Self,
Centered.
yep. We all have these people in our life. What else would you say? Hmm?
Judgmental.
Judgmental, yeah.
Preachy.
Yes. Preachy. Yeah. I'm not telling that story. There's a story about me being a bunch of people telling me how arrogant I was. It's very painful, but also turning point for me. But I was one of those people. What else?
Complacent.
Yes. That's a good point. Like, I don't get moved. That's what you're saying. Like, empathetic people get moved. Even if you're not a feeler on the Myers-Briggs, you get moved, and you'll see there's different ways to make yourself be more empathetic. But you're right. Complacency, disinterest, it doesn't affect me. That's the opposite of empathy. So all that, you get the idea there. There's a couple definitions that I think they're in the manual, but I'm going to pull one up. Now, these are a bit lofty, but you can see empathy is entering the private world of the other and becoming thoroughly at home in it. Now, that's a bit overstated, but it gives you the idea that you're trying to understand. That's what I was trying to do with this mom. Can you understand what's going on with your daughter? On the other hand, the power of understanding, and again, imaginatively, this is Crabb's rational circle, entering into another person's feelings. So it's an emphasis on both your imagination and your ability to focus in particular on what is this person feeling. And feelings are often the first door into, just like in counseling, it's often one of the first ways that you begin to feel empathy for someone. A twist on this, two actors who have remarkable range. This is Anthony Hopkins playing Hannibal Lecter, C.S. Lewis, and Alfred Hitchcock. This is Meryl Streep playing Margaret Thatcher, Julia Childs, and whoever she is in The Devil Wears Prada. Now, the reason I'm putting them up there is because if you're going to be a good actor, you have to know, how do I enter into this character's head? Like in particular, Hopkins, how do you play a psychopathic killer that wins you an Oscar and terrifies anyone who watched the movie? And even Jodie Foster reported, even she was terrified filming because he was so convincing as a serial killer. And then not many years later, you play C.S. Lewis. which, like, oh my God, I just saw on Netflix, now he's playing Sigmund Freud talking to C.S. Lewis. I don't know. Have you ever seen it? Yeah, is it good? Have you seen it?
It's interesting.
Yeah. So, but the point is, to do that, you've really got to be able to get yourself out of the way and then enter into that character. There's speculation that Heath Ledger, because of 2 characters in a row that he played the Joker, and then somebody on some, I forget the name of Creepy Island or something like that, and the speculation that he got so into the character that he couldn't get out of the pit he was in. That if you play really dark characters, you may have trouble sort of pulling out and getting out of it. I'm only bringing up acting for 2 reasons. To be a good actor, you have to know how to imagine, put yourself into somebody else's mind, heart, psyche, story, and understand how they think and how they behave and react in order to really take on the role. I think in counseling, I said last week, assessment is getting data. Remember I said that's collecting old data. It's collecting the data that the client already has. Empathy, and I said part of the way, one way to view assessment is, imagine you're the screenwriter trying to write the movie about your client. And you're trying to discern what scenes do we put in the movie? What's important to tell the audience about your story? And that's collecting data and then figuring out what matters and ranking, again, what's central, what's relevant, what's gripping, what isn't. Empathy is more like not being the screenwriter. Empathy is like trying to be the actor or actress playing your client. That's the other reason I wanted you to think about acting. Because the more you understand and empathize with the client, the more you begin to get more curious, by the way, if they actually begin to let you into some of the rooms that they don't normally let people in. And you got to have to win. This is where empathy helps you win the right to get into those rooms. If we don't have empathy, at some point the person's going to keep the doors closed because they don't feel understood or safe. They feel like you've got an agenda. They feel like you're just trying to dissect them or diagnose them or treat them a bit from a detached perspective. It's very different if you feel like someone's really trying to understand. If you handle the brief glimpses into dark rooms or hard rooms, if you handle those brief glimpses, remember, if you view people as a house and they let you into rooms where you know there's stuff in there and they let you in and they give you a taste of what they think or feel in that room, and you handle that with empathy, they're going to let you back into that room. They're going to open up more of the rooms on the 2nd and 3rd floor or the basement. But empathy is the ticket, if you will. That's the way you gain the safety and trust and the fact that they feel like, okay, you can help me look at what I'm afraid to look at, or what I'm ashamed to look at, or what I'm ashamed to talk about, or I'm confused, or I'm all jumbled about it. And I get the sense you don't need me to have it all packaged up. Yeah.
Are there stages of empathy where there's some things you can't handle, so you can't enter in? And
Yes. Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah. Yeah. And the manual talks about a lot of this content is in the manual, I think. In the sessions here, I'm trying to give you the highlights from my perspective, because in the manual, just reading a lot of words and stuff like that. I do want to make a pitch. The story, in particular, the story at the end of the empathy chapter that Cindy and Joanne wrote, you know, the Meredith Deanna story, it's really powerful in this chapter. So if you haven't read that, it's a really good picture of a counselor trying to stay empathetic and the effect of her being empathetic and how it's the first major turning point in the counseling relationship, and it's because she's demonstrating empathy. So I really want to make sure you read the story. That's one of the best things I think about the manual, because it fleshes it out in some way. Some obvious things, maybe some givens. Empathy is difficult because human beings are defensive, because we're ambivalent about letting people in or not letting people in, because we have a lot of feelings in there. We can feel desperate and eager to get help, and also scared to get help, and also confused and ashamed and guilty and wary. And so when someone comes in, the like Inside Out, the emotions in their head, what I call the committee in their head, is very active. There's a lot of things going on, and a lot of those things are saying, keep this person out. And some of the voices, some of the impulses are saying, no, we got to let somebody in. So when you're trying to talk to somebody, it's just helpful to know people are reluctant, they're ambivalent about getting help or being open or looking at it themselves. They have a lot of strong feelings that affect whether they want to be known or not. And they're scared of what being known will lead to, or what it could set them up for. In many cases, we're ambivalent about actually being dependent or trusting, or trusting and feeling safe enough to be really open, because in many cases, we've been hurt by trusting someone. And it doesn't take a lot of episodes where you get hurt trusting someone before you begin to have a pretty stiff checklist of, I can't trust you until. So there's just things about human nature that I think we all understand. But when you're trying to be empathetic, it's not as easy as books make it seem, partly because a lot of times books don't factor in, for lack of a better term, our depravity, for how double-minded we are, for how confused and ambivalent we are. So that's a piece of it. It's also easy to make one or two mistakes here and lose ground. It's like Chutes and Ladders. You can slide all the way back to the beginning and have to rebuild the trust. So you have to be patient with it and gauge how much do I push, particularly in this first stage. Again, you're trying to build the rapport and relationship. Once you get to tinkering, and you tinker according to assessment, but also according to how connected or how safe the person feels with you. The more safe and connected, the wider your range of tinkering things you can actually employ, because by then they trust you and they're somewhat ready for the provocation that's coming in the tinkering stage. There are two kinds of empathy. We explain this in the manual, but it's good to just see it briefly. Here's the client. And I'm just loosely saying here's conscious and unconscious. And here's the counselor over here. So what's happening? Primary empathy is where the client is telling you events, details, emotions, reactions, responses, desires, that sort of thing. They're telling you what they know. So if they're telling you a story, they're telling you what they know. Clients are not typically aware they are also unconsciously telling you quite a bit. Non-verbally, facially, tone, what they leave out, how they tell a story, how they portray themselves or the people in that story. So clients are giving you a lot of data. Primary empathy is where you're just making sure and what we call giving receipts to what people are telling you about an event or a situation or a relationship or symptoms. So primary empathy is just making sure you are tracking with the data they are trying to give you. And the receipt is just making sure they know, and you're checking with them. So this is what you told me about your daughter and about this meal. Is there anything else you want to tell me? It sounds like you were feeling this when you had dinner with her and you were trying to listen to what your cousin said. So you're giving affirmation, or what we just call receipts. It's receipts like when you go to the grocery store. The receipt tells you everything that you bought. In a sense, clients give you a bunch of items and you want to make sure you're saying, have I got all the things you've told me? That's primary empathy. So they're the ones expressing over here, And to some degree, they're the ones consciously exploring their own content themselves. And they're sharing all that with you. So you're just acknowledging what they are expressing and exploring. That makes sense? Advanced empathy is where you begin to say, now you're the one down here, you're the one exploring. You're the one thinking, what else is going on here? What else might be going on for this person? And advanced empathy is tentatively giving interpretations or explaining. Do you notice that when you said ABC, you teared up? And when you said XYZ, you got tight. So now you're pointing out their nonverbals and suggesting those two things, your tears and that tightness, are both revealing something that maybe you don't know you're revealing. Now that's an example of advanced empathy, where you're beginning to process what else you see or feel or read or get signals for. Does that make sense? Emphasis on two things: gentleness and tentative, meaning you're being careful. You don't know if you're right. Sometimes you're pretty sure you're right. And the more you know a person, the less you have to be so careful. And the more the person, when a person starts getting this advanced empathy, this is data a client does not have when they come into counseling. This is the me you see, I don't see. The me you're getting to know that I don't know. And I need help to know what else I'm telling you, because a lot of what I'm struggling with is because of what I'm doing down here, and I don't know how to get at what's driving my behavior or what my thoughts or beliefs are behind my behavior. So once they trust the process, they actually want to know, what are you hearing me say? What do you think I meant by that? Help me understand the reaction I got from my spouse, my kid, my boss was not at all what I was expecting. And that's confusing to me. Can you help me sort that out? Why do you think this is what happened based on what I was doing? So the more the relationship builds the trust and everything, the more free you are to begin to offer some interpretations, some hypotheses, or at least explore what's in the room, whatever room you're in their house, so to speak. You're exploring things and saying, I think I understand why this thing is in here and why you haven't been able to, you don't know what to do with this event or this relationship or this memory or whatever. Does that make sense? You understand those two things? By the way, advanced empathy is always tinkering, because tinkering just changes the mindset or the perspective of the client, whatever changes that perspective. I said before, there are things you can do to be empathetic, because there are a lot of people that are hard to be empathetic with. They're very defended or very different, or their story is really hard to listen to, or they're very out of touch. So I kind of think of it like you've got, imagine these are windows on the second floor of your client's life. And I think to get access to the second floor, there are 3 windows you can try to get in through. The first one is just trying to understand. And that just means I sense your need. So I can have a client I don't particularly feel drawn to, I don't particularly like. They're not hard, they're hard to track with. I can tell they're uncomfortable. Oftentimes, if they're uncomfortable, it's pretty hard for you to not feel some of that discomfort, and you got to really avoid the responsibility to make them feel comfortable and all that kind of thing. But you're looking for something. A simple way to put it, you want to find some longing, some motivation, some aspect of their dignity that you can understand and champion. So if the first way, the only way you can have empathy for someone is just understanding the need they have and how they're trying to have that need met, that's kind of a cognitive empathy. Like, I get the picture. I mentioned before, when I started having the first pedophile I had, it was really, I was not drawn to him at all. And in fact, emotionally, I had to really go through, like, I think you should be shot or castrated. There's a reaction to, you're hearing the story. And this was a criminal case where it was a court appointed. But I knew I'm not going to get anywhere. And this was not a guy who would just, hey, look, I got to put in my 6 sessions so that I have a shorter sentence. That he wanted to know, you could tell he was at least saying, I don't know why I do what I do. There was enough of a crack there. But I had all this inner prejudice. But for me to work with someone, for the bridge to be connected in some way, I couldn't come from the other 2 ways. It had to come from, I know there's a story here, and I know your pedophilia is a terrible strategy to meet some legitimate longing. I hope that doesn't shock you. There's some longing in here to count, to be noticed, to be recognized, to have influence or impact, or to, in many cases, not all, certainly, to reenact what happened to me. But if our prejudice gets in the way, we don't even want to go up on the 2nd floor. But I thought, this guy he's not checking a box here. He actually wants help. I was not drawn to him at all, and certainly not when I heard the essence of the story. But I did know I can get through the window of understanding. I can cognitively begin to recognize, how do I begin to connect dots to understand how you got from your story into abusing children? That makes sense? There are other people that you just have an affinity for them. Simple terms, you just like them. Like, they are open or inviting or winsome. And it's actually easy to start the empathy train with that way. So I look forward to you coming in. I hope you're not surprised. There are clients you look forward to and clients you're like, oh, they're coming. Doesn't mean you're not trying to be empathetic with all of them, but some people are just a lot easier to be empathetic for. And again, there are people that are really likable, but then pretty shut down. And at some point, the likability has to be sort of buttressed by openness, by candor, by letting you in. But it is easy to start feeling empathy, to get the engine going and feel like and want to be on the 2nd floor if you like the person. The third one is some kind of, call it support or compassion. And there you're simply saying, I see the hurt. Here I see the value or the likability. Here I see the need. Here I see the hurt. And if you see the hurt, that may be the way that you get into the 2nd floor. That may be the way you begin to build some genuine empathy for this person. If you stay on the 2nd floor long enough, by the way, for me anyway, you really understand a person better. You actually start liking them to some degree. And your compassion increases, while at the same time, you're also directing them to better ways to deal with their hurt and their pain. But for me, because I'm not a feeler, I'm not naturally an empathetic person. I tend to trust that cognitively, I'm going to want to connect with your story. I want to root for you, but I've got to find something in your story that makes me begin to root for you. So I've got to understand your story and try to hold back my judgmentalism. When people tell me you should watch this movie or watch this TV show, I've told people, I'll give it one session. If there's not somebody I'm rooting for, I'm not going to watch. I can't afford to do that in counseling. In counseling, I got to keep watching the series until I actually know I can't, like what you're referring to, Carrie, where, yeah, are there some people you just can't do it? Yes, there are. Have I fired clients before? A couple of times. And part of it, for lack of a better way to put it, because I know I'm not going to be, I don't want to be on the second floor. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe. I don't trust you. There's too much prejudice in me, or your story triggers me in some way.
Did you fire them or did you fire yourself?
Take your pick. I mean, the quote professional way is, I'm not sure I have the skills or training to help you, and let me refer you to someone. And then I think, okay, who do I not like? I want to refer them to. But sorry, you're going to have to edit that. A couple of things this relates to you. You can tell the empathy is not working when a client starts telling you less and less. When a client starts feeling like you're interrogating them, you're only interested in, again, assessment without empathy is like writing a news story or being a detective. And people they don't like the interrogation process. Empathy without assessment is it is sort of creating a friendship, if you will, that doesn't go anywhere. And whether you're paying for counseling or not paying for counseling, this relationship it's not a friendship. It's an intimate relationship with a purpose. Yeah.
Is that too much empathy? What is too much empathy look like?
I think too much empathy where you're not, you're feeling for the person, but you're not able to sort of wisely step back and say, what is really happening here, and what do they need to do, and what do I think the Holy Spirit's trying to do? They're in counseling because something is up, and something in their life needs to be brought to the surface. That's why we talk about exposure. But if you like a person too much, like I have friends that I have empathy for, but I'm not much help to them in terms of helping them look in the mirror or wrestle. And they don't, it's sort of like an unconscious agreement. I'm not going to say hard things to you, and you're not going to say hard things to me. And it's a good friendship, and it's easy to be with him, but we don't share that kind of thing. This is a compassionate working relationship. And at some point, clients will feel like, we're not getting anywhere. I mean, I like talking to you, but we're not getting anywhere. Or you feel like, yeah, I enjoy you coming in, but I don't think you're making progress. I don't think we're in the room where the Holy Spirit's trying to do something to get you going in a certain direction. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Any other questions before we wrap up this section? Again, there's a better answer to your question about when is empathy hard. It's actually quite hard when you're very the assessment phase. The more different you are, the longer assessment takes. If somebody's got a chronic disease, if somebody's got a disability of some kind, if somebody's from another country or race or ethnicity, if somebody's from another generation, if somebody's story is radically different than yours, it takes longer for them to educate you. And often I will say, like I remember one of the first clients I had that had Crohn's disease, I'd never heard of it. And I said, well, give me something you think I should read so I at least understand how Crohn's disease affects you emotionally and physically. Same thing, if you're a second generation immigrant, I don't know what that means. I mean, I don't know what it means to you. You got to fill me in a little bit about how is your cultural background and history, the blend of two countries, how is that affecting what you're talking about? You got to educate me. The more they have something that I am completely a student, like I have, then yeah, remember that's part of assessment. You're the expert, I'm the student in the beginning. When you start getting into advanced empathy, now that those roles begin to switch. Because none of us are experts, but in the counselor role, you're trying to be the one who's better at putting the puzzle together. Assessment is where you're getting all the pieces of their puzzle. Most people come in and they put the edges together and they have some of the pictures in the middle. But there's a lot of blank spots. This is like, I don't know what to do, and I don't know how I got here, and I don't know what's wrong, and all that kind of thing. Your job, once you get the empathy going in the next talk, tinkering is where you start finding new pieces to put in the puzzle. And that's the work. Whether people know that or not, that's the work that you're trying to do. And the purpose of tinkering is to generate new data for you and the client. The purpose of assessment is to get all the old data that they already know. All right, let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come in and a comment at the break, which I thought was very sweet. Carrie said when she saw the story in the back, before she read the manual, she just read all the chapters, all of the vignettes about the story to see how the counseling goes, which I think is sweet. And like I said, Cindy's one of the authors, so I want to express appreciation. But again, it's one of my favorite things. But her comment was like, but this counselor really knew what to say in all these situations. Like it looks like, you go 4 for 4 in the World Series and and that kind of thing. Like you're throwing a no-hitter. It feels very unrealistic. And I think it's appropriate to say, yeah, that's not what counseling's like. And it reminded me when Crab and Allen were teaching, they said, now here's theoretically how you do counseling. So you start out here in the symptoms and situations, and then you talk about their emotions and help them identify their emotions. And once you get then you start to talk about their behaviors, and then you get into their motives, and then you get into their belief system and where those beliefs came from. Then you get into what they really see and how they think about themselves. Then you get into the personal circle, and that's where they have a sort of a renewal in their sense of security and assurance of faith and God's presence and God's love for them, and they're adopted and all that sort of thing. And then that changes their belief system and how they see themselves in God, and that changes their motives, and then that changes their behavior, and then that changes how they feel, and then that changes symptoms and circumstances and relationships. So pretty simple. And then they both said, but here's what counseling's really like. That's what it's really like. And so you have a rough roadmap. Yeah.
Just gonna say, also we were doing empathy on the empathy week.
Yeah.
Tinkering on the tinkering with empathy.
Yeah. When the way we used to do this, you'd go straight from one talk and then go into your groups. And you can imagine, so when you're doing assessment, of course, we're just going to assess the victim, whoever the client is of the night. And then tinkering, okay, we're going to tinker with them. When you get to gender, then we're going to talk about your gender. And we get to trauma, tell us about your trauma. And you're just hearing the story for the first time, but you're going after trauma. And then you get to resistance, and then it gets really ugly. Because then all you're looking for, because you just heard resistance for an hour, now you're just looking for the poor person who's presenting their story. Everybody's just aiming on, you're being resistant. You're being resistant. That's it's just, we're sort of arming you prematurely, if you will. So. I'm going to say something dramatic here. I actually think most of it, once you understand my definition of tinkering, you'll understand why I'm saying what I'm about to say. I think most of the Bible is God tinkering with humans. What I mean by that is most of the scripture, the stories, the parables, the images, the visions, the dreams, even the commandments, which essentially what we learn in Romans is that the commandments, the primary intention, it is to tell us this is the way God designed for us to live, but really the commandments, the law, if you will, is meant to convict us that we can't live up to it. But so much of what's told in the stories, especially, is God trying to get us to see what else is going on, to change our perspective, to shift how we're thinking or feeling or what we're expecting or what we think is supposed to be happening or what we think God should be doing. I mean, we should all be able to relate to the disciples who were continually surprised by what Jesus did or didn't do, and continually confused by what he was saying, and continually missed, until he came back from the dead, missed the heart of the message. Even though Jesus was constantly tinkering with content, with behavior, with imagery, with metaphors and parables and pictures, he was trying to get them to see something they couldn't see. This is why we have a whole session on resistance, because there's something in us that really has trouble getting the big picture. And tinkering is just, it's synonymous with just intervening in someone's life in a way that expands or alters or in some way is up some category of thinking or experiencing or making sense of the world in a different way than the lens through which we grew up in our own part in it, our own lives and relationships. So the scriptures are trying to show us that God is really interested in intervening without overtaking our will. So it's, in that sense, the Bible is incredibly provocative. Tinkering is about provoking a better picture, a different picture of what's happening inside us and what's happening in our relationships and what's happening in the world. And once we begin to see it, again, we have more and more questions, but we also begin to be less and less idealistic or simplistic or sort of wishful thinking or naive about what God is up to. One simple example, and I think you could pick almost any Jesus story, but this is just one of those stories that I think is, it's, if you read it, and I happen to have a pet theory that Jesus, for the most part, when Jesus is alone with women, he's fundamentally different relationally than when he's alone with men. That's my own premise. You know, we have about a dozen encounters where Jesus has some kind of intimate connection, not all totally private, but certainly some. You know, 2 weeks ago we looked at the woman at the well. This is another brief encounter, and we don't have the context really very well. But I want you to hear, this is the one story of Jesus with a woman where you could hear the story, particularly if you were a Sunday school kid, and you heard the story, if they just read the story and you're a Sunday school kid and said, particularly if you're a girl in Sunday school and said, what did you think of Jesus in this story? And it wouldn't be favorable. So let me read the story. This is in the Phillips translation. This is the Matthew's version. It's in Mark as well. Jesus left that place and retired into the Tyre and Sidon district. There, a Canaanite woman from those parts came to him, crying at the top of her voice, Lord, have pity on me. My daughter's in a terrible state. The devil has got her. Jesus made no answer. The NIV said Jesus was silent. Silence is an interesting phenomena in counseling. What silence conveys to someone is significant. It's never insignificant. It's noteworthy. Again, pretend you're this woman. You cry out, you plead to Jesus to help. You're desperate, like the mom I shared later or earlier. And what you get is silence from the rabbi miracle worker. Jesus made no answer, and the disciples came up to him and said, Send her away. She's still following us and calling out. Again, you see, they don't get the picture here. They're Jews. This is a Canaanite, and she's a woman. 2 strikes against her. Like the Samaritan woman, what are you doing talking to her? And now you didn't answer her, and now she's bugging us. She's coming after us because you didn't answer her. Like, how do we get rid of this person? And Jesus says it's unclear whether he's saying this to the disciples or to the woman. He says, I was only sent, replied Jesus, to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You're this woman. What did you just hear? You're not a Jew. What did you hear?
He's not for her.
Say it again.
He's not for her.
Yeah? And how, if you were this woman, how would you feel?
Like, he's not gonna help me.
Yeah, disappointed, certainly. Anything else?
Bad.
Mad and, say it again.
Rejected.
Yeah, and judged and put down, all of that. It's not, this is not the answer you're hoping for. Silence followed by, I'm not here for you people. Like he's saying, in one sense, you could hear him saying, I only care about the Israelites, not you people. The woman came and kneeled at his feet. Why? He just said, if you were this woman, how you'd feel. Why did she still pursue?
Desperate.
Yes. And something in this, we don't know what, something in her says, don't quit. She came and knelt at his feet. Lord, help me, she said. Again, Jesus responds, it's not right, you know, to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Meaning, I came for the children of Israel. It's not appropriate for me to take the food for the children of Israel and throw it to the dogs. Now, how do you feel? I felt bad before. Now, you just added insult to injury here. Like, how many ways can you say no and put me down? But this woman, just like the Samaritan woman, we don't know here. We don't know how she picks this up, or whether it's just the chutzpah or the desperation or the dignity, but her dignity speaks up, and pretty quickly, I assume. If we were filming this, I wouldn't have this woman hesitate. This woman's sharp, just like the Samaritan woman. And she goes, yes, Lord, I know, but even the dogs live on the scraps that fall from their master's table. So she's on his level, and she matches him image for image. And that's true. I mean, it's a true image, right? Dogs would, if you have a dog, you know, and your dog gets table scraps, ours doesn't, but if you did, you can imagine he's going to be hanging around the table. And she's saying, look, we deserve the scraps that Israel doesn't want. Now you understand, that actually follows with what Jesus says later about the banquet. If the people of Israel don't want this, go find people and invite them to the banquet. Nowhere in Israel have I seen faith like this Roman centurion. Jesus, for whatever reason, plays this out. He's not nice until she speaks up. Kind of like the Samaritan woman, when he brings up the husband, there's a turning point there. There's a uh-oh moment. But Jesus, again, he has the Holy Spirit. I don't know why. This is the one passage where he seems rude and insensitive until the woman responds. And then I can imagine Jesus is just thrilled that she stayed with it. And that he would smile and he says, you certainly don't lack faith. Like he praises her at this point. And it shall be as you wish, meaning your daughter will be healed. And I see what I mean? Jesus is tinkering with this woman and the disciples. This is not predictable Jesus behavior. When the woman's caught in adultery, he has empathy for that woman and he bends down. We don't exactly know why. I think, my guess, he's trying to draw attention away from her to whatever he's scribbling in the sand. And then with this crowd, again, tinkering is, how do I get this crowd to think differently than they currently think? So he simply says, anyone who hasn't sinned, you can throw the first stone. So he's honoring the commandment or the law, so to speak, but he's holding them to a standard. And fortunately, again, that's tinkering. That's a tinkering response. He's altering the whole event, the whole mood. He's just very good at coming up with imagery, language, questions, an approach that neither his disciples nor in many cases the people in the stories could possibly expect or predict. I think the disciples had to always be pulling aside, what do you think he's going to do this time? Where did that come from? Did you expect him to say it? They had to just be baffled and amazed and startled by his creativity. That's tinkering. When God gives images, the way he shows up, the messages he gives, I've laughed before that if you're a blind man in Jesus' day, you might get healed just by a word. The guy in John 9, he gets mud slapped in his eye, and Jesus says, you got to go to the pool of Siloam and wash your eye, and then, and I thought, if I was that guy, wait a minute, Bartimaeus didn't have to go somewhere. And by the way, I'm blind. I got to walk to the pool. That's not easy for a blind person. Put this junk on my eye. That's not what happened before. And all you can say is, Jesus is very creative, and he doesn't repeat himself. He's unpredictable. And that's part of what I want you to get the feel for with tinkering is, we'll give you some pretty classic things, techniques or tools, but a lot of tinkering with a person is intuitive. It's creative, it's timely, it's just something that, again, the more at peace you are and the more you kind of, for lack of a better way to put it, can think like you see in the scriptures, you will get imagery or pictures to share. You'll get ideas. You'll get questions you want to ask. You'll figure out, how do I turn this event so that this person and I are looking at this event through a different lens? How do we monkey with the data in such a way that more is revealed or unleashed? That's essentially what tinkering is trying to do, bring more out into the open. I hope it goes without saying, tinkering this is part of where, remember the first two models I shared, the simple models where Clara Hill and Gerard Egan, they both have they were 3 stages. Both of them had a stage that was about behavior. Like, in other words, you're not in counseling just to talk about something. Counseling is not just trying to increase understanding or even intimacy with another person. It's meant to have an active component. Think of the 2 verbs Jesus used with people. I want you to come unto me and find rest. And once you've found rest for your soul, once you've been saved, once you have your new identity, once you know your place, once you know you're provided for, once you feel that relaxed security, now I want you to go. So that coming and going, coming to counseling, so you're understood, so you feel safe, so you can process, so you can think things through. But you want to, and then go do something. You're not just gaining understanding. This is meant to result in some kind of behavioral change. Tinkering can take place in the counseling. A lot of tinkering, especially in the beginning stage, is just in the counseling office or in the counseling relationship, by the kinds of questions you ask and the kinds of reactions you have or the kinds of hypotheses you put out. But a lot of tinkering is also giving people assignments. Like, go out and, if you're willing, go out and try this and come back and report and see, let's see what happens. I'll give you a very simple one. It's actually a kind, can be helpful for me. Again, a lot of tinkering assignments actually just add to the assessment. That's what I mean. They give you new puzzle pieces. So with a lot of couples where I can tell they're really discouraged in their marriage and their relationship, not unusual for me to say, let's call it Fred and Ethel. I want you to both go home, take a note card, and I want you to write a list of, you got 3 wishes this week. Now here's the rule. So Ethel, you say, Fred, I would be a little encouraged, just a little encouraged in our marriage if this week you would do ABC. And Fred, you say the same thing. Ethel, I'd be a little encouraged in our marriage if you go home and write 3 things, if you go home and do these 3 things that would make me feel a little encouraged about our relationship. So there's a rule here, like Aladdin and Genie. What you can't ask for is something your partner's going to resent. I had some idiot, when I did this, he said, oh, goody, I get 3 blank acts, sex acts of a certain kind. And his wife looked at me like, you better not back that up. And I looked at him like, are you out of your mind? What in you made you think? I wanted to say, what did you hope that would accomplish? Do you think you made ground here with your wife? You think your wife is less discouraged now than she was before you just opened your mouth? Okay, you know, he was trying to be funny, I think, but he was also revealing. Again, I'm not sorry he said it because it's data. And you'll hear me say this, no matter what happens with the tinkering assignments, it's data. Even if somebody comes back and says, yeah, I know I said I was going to jump this little cliff, but I didn't do it. That's data. Okay, fine. You're not doing it for me. If you got home and said, I completely forgot, or I looked at it and said, no way I'm doing that. Good, let's just explore what happened. It's important to know it made sense to you in the session. You went home and you looked at it again and thought, whoa, no, I'm not doing that. So anyway, back to this assignment. So you can't ask somebody to do something that they're going to resent. You can't ask somebody to do a personality change. You can't ask somebody, like one woman, bless her heart, she said, I just want my husband to pray with me. My husband's a non-believer. And I was kind of like, okay. You know, that's, again, you see you're asking, it's not hard to see what you wish was happening in your relationship. But that's not something your husband's going to go, okay, I can do that. Or I'm happy to do that. What you want is something that your partner goes, oh, especially, and this is true more for men, you give me 3 that give me points in marriage, absolutely, I'll do that. The funny thing that happens most often, women will come in with the assignment done. And they will have told their husband. I want to say half the time, I say, well, husband, what was your list? Oh, I didn't do it. Why not? I just wanted to do what was on her list. Now, again, that's data. I don't quite know what to make of it, but you can tell. And often the woman is like, he doesn't get it, or it wasn't important. I mean, she doesn't take it the way he thinks, like I'm just being a servant or whatever he thinks. But it's just a weird phenomenon. But husbands are happy to get a list. If I can make you a little more happy, and it's something I can actually do instead of trying to guess or dig myself out of a hole, yeah, I'll do that. So often I'll give that assignment, and then of course I want to know what happens when they come back and who did what and how to go. And again, you often hear people break the few rules. You can't ask for something that takes a lot of money or a lot of time. You can't ask for something that really requires a major shift in belief system or worldview or personality or something like that. So this one woman, one of the first times I did this woman, they had 3 little kids that were pretty rambunctious. And she was kind of like, yeah, my husband's not very good with the kids, so most of the parenting falls on me during the day and at night, and I'm just, you know, I'm harried. And she said, number 1 on my list, I'm in trouble with this assignment. She said, I just want an hour alone in the bathroom. I want to take a bubble bath with a glass of wine and a magazine for an hour, and you take care of the kids. She said, I don't even have 2 other wishes. That's all I want. I said, okay. And her husband wasn't in the room. I said, so go home and pitch this to him. You got to pitch this assignment. And so, of course, the next time I wanted to see how'd it go. And she said, well, she came in laughing and she goes, well, about 10 minutes in, we were out of wine. I got the bubble bath going. About 10 minutes in, all the kids were pounding on the door. My husband finally opened the door and says, I don't know what to do with them. They're going nuts. And she said, so I was in the bathtub for about 20 minutes and then had to get out and rescue the kids. And again, this is an assignment. And all it did is give me a better picture. It helped me. I think it helped her a little bit in the sense of I can actually try to express something that maybe he can attempt. You know, he got points for trying. He didn't get points for being very good at it. But part of this is just helping people acknowledge something that they want, because it's often hard for us to read the other person's mind. So that's a simple kind of assignment. Other assignments can be, but a lot of people have done what's called an avoidance list. So write down 20 things that you avoid doing in your life. And probably you see other people doing it and you say, I wish I could do that, but I put that off. I don't like doing that. So write those things down. Like if I said, there's another common tinkering question. If I gave you 24 hours of courage, if I gave you an injection of courage, like more courage than you've ever felt for 24 hours, what would you do? Now, the reason that's helpful is what you're trying to do technique-wise, you're trying to get around conscious resistance by just a magical idea. If you had courage, and then all the voices in your head that said, I'm afraid, Because you got a shot of courage, all those voices just go quiet. And then when you're getting rid of the conscious resistance and then seeing, does my unconscious actually suggest what I do? It's a variation on the, if you won $1 million, what would you do? But this is more like, where am I really controlled by fear? And if I gave you an injection of courage, use your imagination, what would you do differently? Now that's just a tinkering question, but what we're trying to get out is, where is your fear controlling you? And that picture just brings that to the surface. Well, the avoidance list is also similar. Like, so here's things like a lot of people, I think because we're nice Christians or servants or whatever, like I don't confront people. Something as simple as I don't ask for what I want at a restaurant. I ask for what costs the least. Or if my meal isn't good, I would never send it back. Or if my mother-in-law gave me a gift I hated, I would just pretend I liked it. And I would never process that. I'd never try to communicate with her. So you can see, whatever people write on that avoidance list, that's actually not hard. I mean, it sounds hard to come up with 20 things, but if you start doing it, it's not hard. Then I say, okay, rank the difficulty on a 1 to 10 of those 20 things. And then I would say, like Kristen, if you were my client, I'd say, you got 20 things here ranked from 1 to 10. I want you to pick 5 of them. You get to pick how severe they feel and try and do them this week. Now, Kristen's going to walk out of the office going, okay, I've got an assignment that I don't want to do. Because these are things I avoid, and now you told me to do something I avoid. I'm simply saying, let's pay attention to what happened, because now the committee in your head is going to be talking about, the good girl is going to say, I got to do my homework. The rest of you is going to say, I don't want to do the homework. And you're going to experience a week of debating with this assignment. And I'm just curious what happens when you come back. Now, if Kristen actually comes back and said, I picked one that was an 8, because something in me said, pick a hard one, and I did it. Now, she's going to come back with 2 experiences generally. This is how it went and how I feel about how it went. And by the way, you have to be aware that a lot of tinkering assignments are going to bomb. Like I worked up the nerve to ask for a raise. I didn't get it, and actually I got put on probation. So thanks a lot. Or they're just going to come back and say, I just couldn't do it for whatever reason. And that's like, okay, let's explore that. Or people are going to come back and go, it wasn't nearly as hard as I thought it was. Or, it really was hard, but I feel really good. One of the other benefits of tinkering, because most people come into counseling feeling pretty stuck. Like I can't get out of the rut I'm in. Tinkering just starts practicing the volitional side and making progress in something that may not be central, but it gives you the feeling of, I have choices I can make. I was at UVA in the counseling center, and one of the common issues that people would come in for counseling, because they only had 6 sessions, so you didn't get all this stuff. But a lot of times people would come in with test anxiety. So like if Joe came in and he was taking a test in anthropology and said, look, last time I took an exam, I just froze completely. I got the exam and I couldn't remember anything. And my brain just locked up. Now, pretty common technique for something like that is, okay, Joe, if they let you, take a piece of scratch paper. And when you sense yourself locking up, when they pass out the exam, I guess they don't pass them out anymore, but then they did. They pass out the exam and you can feel yourself locking up. Take the scratch paper and either write a nursery rhyme out, do some math problems. If you write a scripture verse out, but get your mind on something else, get your cognitive mind unlocked by doing something irrelevant to anthropology or whatever the exam is. Because once you get your mind unlocked, then it'll come back online for what you trained it to do to take this exam. It's not a whole lot different than breathing exercises that get you focused on breathing instead of panic, or relaxation exercises that get your mind and your body focused somewhere else in order to get you sort of restored enough to tackle what's really creating an issue for you. So a lot of tinkering is about just getting a person to feel like I've got some freedom here. There's some things I can do. I'm not stuck, because we tend to be, when we're stuck, we tend to think very binary. Either need a miracle or nothing's going to happen. Instead of, no, I gotta start trying some things and collect some data and see what happens and begin to get traction in some direction or another. I want to give you a couple examples in addition to the ones I've already given. The funniest one, and I just like including this because it's a funny story. When Debbie and I were in Indiana, this is my wife Debbie, if you haven't met her. So I was a student, and we had a 1-bedroom apartment, or 2-bedroom, 2-bedroom, I guess. I can't remember. 2-bedroom? Okay. So we had a 1-bedroom apartment in Indiana, and one night in the first semester, we boldly decided to invite the Crabs and Allanders over to our house for dinner, and so they agreed to come. And it was winter time, and we greeted them at the door, and they took their coats off, and Larry and Dan just marched down the hall to the master bedroom and shut the door. And Debbie and I are looking at each other like, and then we look at Becky and Rachel, the spouses, like, what are they doing? And their spouses just go, you never know. It just sort of, and we're looking at each other thinking, and the door's closed, and we can hear them doing something in the bedroom. And we're like, and Debbie finally, she's much braver than me. Again, I'm a student. I'm trying to make a good impression, and think I'm, potential counselor or whatever. I'm just afraid to do anything. Debbie finally is like, I got to know what they're doing. So she marches down the hall, and of course I follow her. And they open the door, and Dan is in the walk-in closet. And our walk-in closet has 2 sides. My side is probably like a lot of yours, pretty junky and just pushed together. Debbie's a little more neat, a lot more neat. Not OCD, but in that direction. So their clothes are lined up in proper fashion. But interestingly enough, she has a bunch of shoe boxes, and the shoe boxes have the label of these are navy flats or brown boots. All the boxes, the shoes are in the boxes, and they're all labeled. Well, Allander's in there shifting the shoes, swapping boxes, and moving her shoes all around from different boxes. Yeah, see that face? They were like, and Dr. Crab is rifling through the doors of our night table. And we're standing there kind of going, what is this? And they start, and Debbie's like, what are you guys doing? You got to stop that. And they just start laughing. And then they came out, and we sat and had dinner, and we just had to recover. I had to recover, yeah. Now, I had never, they did not teach the concept of tinkering. This is my concept here. But this was the beginning of my understanding that when you do things that people don't expect, you see a side to someone that they're not going to portray. And they got a sense of what she was like and what I was like just by messing with our space. Jesus messed with people's spaces. God messes with people's spaces. The burning bush is God messing with Moses and his space. The plagues are God messing with the Pharaoh's space and place. So it was just a good example of what happens when somebody does something pretty unpredictable, and you're just winging it, and you can't think it through. You can't have a mapped out strategy. This is what I do when I'm blank, because it's too raw, it's too fresh. So a lot of times tinkering with someone is it's asking the kind of question that they're not expecting, so that you get them less defended or less prepared or less wary, and you get a more honest look at some of the processes going on. a lot of times this is just having very provocative questions. I mean, questions is, you saw that in the manual, it's called theory guided questions, but it's just questions, you go a little beyond what people normally ask. In terms of intimacy, however much intimate, you can imagine people are willing to be honest, sort of like Shrek, to a certain level. So if they're very shallow, they'll go like this. So you want to do something that takes them down one layer. If they're already more willing to be open and reflective, then you want to take them to where the average person wouldn't take them. And that's going to dictate the kind of question or the angle from which you're going to approach them. In some cases, tinkering is also a kind of gentle exposure of something that you're picking up, and it's a guess on your part. I'll give you a simple example. I had a CEO from a corporation who came in. I can't remember what his presenting issue was, but what I know is I was dressed in jeans and a sweater and a shirt, and he was dressed in a three-piece suit. And that would be fine, except his attitude was also a three-piece suit. His attitude, his hair was all in place. Everything was, professional, the image, everything. And I could feel myself, part of me just wanted to go mess his hair up to see what he would do. And I knew I can't cross the space like that. In his case, we were talking about how buttoned up he was and how much his role and image dictated who he had to be and how he had to look and that kind of thing. And I suggested to him, I said, do you want to experiment? Do you want to take some risks and sort of break out of some of this? And you could tell he was ambivalent. Do I want to do that? I'm not sure. And this guy who looks pretty sloppy is talking to me, and I'm a six-figure CEO. And I'm not sure you're going to be able to help me. That attitude was in the room. And I said to him, where do you normally get your clothes? And he mentioned some shop I'd never heard of. And I said, well, if you really want to take a risk here and get below the surface and get at some of what you feel underneath, how you present yourself, what do you think about going to Kmart and getting a dress shirt there and wearing it to work? Now, this is one of those examples where tinkering bombed, because the guy looked at me like, have you ever worked in corporate America? And of course I said, nope. And he goes, I thought so. I said, you don't realize, sort of like, there is no way I would ever do that. And I lost points. I lost credibility. Tinkering is a gamble. But what we both understood is that I came close to a room, I knocked on a door, and I tried to experiment or tinker with that room, and he was like, mm-mm. So, and you have to honor that resistance. And I just apologized and said, that was just an idea. You scramble and try and clean up the mess and move on. But part of this is you get instincts and you go with the instinct when you can. I had a family early on that came in with a 17-year-old boy who had one chore in their house. The football player, and came in. And of course, when he came in, they all came in. He sat on the couch and flopped and arms down and sort of like already bored. Within 30 seconds, he's bored and when is this going to be over? And the mom explained that, look, let's call him Josh. Josh only has one chore. He has to take, on Monday nights, he has to take the trash from the house, collect all the trash and put it in the cans and take it to the curb. And he just, 1 out of 10 times he does it. And the mom's like, so eventually I have to do it. And the dad's sitting there going, and this is really not right. Like, this has to change. And then we're digging in here. And we don't know what to do. And the kid's kind of looking at me like, yep. Like, got him just where I want him. I'll do it if I feel like doing it. And there's nothing they can do. It's always why parents are in power struggles, because whoever behavior is on the line, they have more power. You're trying to change your kid, they have more power. We're trying to change this kid. And they said, do you have any ideas? I said, well, let's brainstorm a little bit. And at that time, this was when the Cosby Show, before Cosby, crashed and all that. It was a very popular show. Everybody watched the Cosby Show. And I said, and again, I'm trying to loop the kid in a little bit, so I think, well, maybe he watches this show. And I said, well, if you guys were the Cosbys, how do you think this episode would be resolved in the Cosby Show? And they started chuckling and sort of imagining what Cliff, or what was her name, Claire, what they would do or what Theo would do and that kind of thing. And they were trying to come up with humorous things. And I said, I have an idea, but I'm not sure to the mom. I said, I'm not sure you're going to want to do this, but I'll at least throw it out there. And she's like, okay. And I said, so the next time he doesn't take the trash to the curb, I want you to collect all the trash, go into his room and dump it all on his bed. Now the kid at this point is like, excuse me? And I said, yeah. I don't know how many times you would have to do that, but you're at least going to get your son's attention. And you could tell the kid he was thinking quickly. He's like, yeah, you do that and you see what I do to you. I said, okay, fair enough. Game on. You're challenging your parents. And so what are you going to do? He said, I don't know. I'll think of something. Now, the husband turned to me and goes, she would never do that. She's too much of a neatnik. She would never take trash and dump it on his bed, and she'd have to clean it all up. And, he's just like, it wouldn't work. And I said, well, okay. I'm just telling you, but if you want to experiment, try something he's not expecting, you're unsure whether you're willing to do it, but you're at least changing the hands. You're at least dealing a different hand and seeing what happens. That could blow up. I get it. And I'm not in your house. I don't have to clean it up. I don't have to deal with his revenge or however he acts out. But if you want to change what's happening, then experiment. And if that doesn't sound good, at least start thinking of other things. And I said to the kid, I said, if you don't want to be sort of more annoyed with your parents, you do have a choice. You don't have to take it, but you could collaborate with them. You actually might have the best idea about what would get you to do it more often. You might be able to come up with some kind of plan. In his mind, it would be, yeah, I get $10 if I do it. I mean, he'd come up with some kind of thing. But if you collaborate, if this is something, and I'd say to Josh, if you really hate this job, at least negotiate for a different job. Because this, you're not operating like a family, and you all know it. And you know it, Josh. You're not collaborating here. So see if you can collaborate as a family. Now all of that's just an example of what tinkering is, just not necessarily problem solving, but moving things around to see what happens. Does that make sense? One more example. And this is a woman who, she grew up in a family, a very tight-knit ethnic family, but there was a lot of abuse in the family. And this woman was in her mid-40s, married with kids, and her dad still intervened and tried to control the family budget, her family's budget, and wanted monthly reports on what they were making, and really annoyed her husband. And but she was caught between her husband and her dad, and was raised to respect her dad, and whatever her dad said, she should do it. Sort of an old school mentality. But she was really afraid of not doing, of what the repercussions would be if she didn't continue to send their financial reports and honor whatever he suggested they should do with their money, and how they should invest it and all that. And she said, I'm just really scared to do anything. I don't know what to do. And I took out my pad of paper and I said, well, let's write him a letter. And she was like, come again? I said, we're not going to send it. I just want you to pretend you had courage and you were going to try to communicate with him about how you wanted the relationship, and what you and your husband, what you're like. Oh, they said, remember, write an imaginary letter. You're trying to lower the resistance to see if they will try something. And she said, okay, I guess, which you're going to get that response. Like, I'm not sure this is a good idea, but okay, I'll give you a few minutes here. So, dear Dad, I start writing on the paper. She goes, that's not how I'd start. Well, how do you? And whatever she calls him, dear something. So, I'm writing to you because I need to explain that things are going to change about our communication about money. She goes, whoa, 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 that's not how I would say that. So, okay, tell me how you would say it. So we sit there back and forth, and I'm just she's dictating now. Eventually, she gets on board and she starts using her own voice, her own language, and writing what she would write if she had 24 hours of courage. By the end of it, I say, well, there you go. There's something you could write in your own handwriting and send if you want. She goes, well, I'm never doing that. I said, that's up to you. But you got to the first stage of imagining taking it on. And again, this is just helping somebody get unstuck just by using a creative technique. A lot of tinkering is just learning how to ask good questions. I use role play a lot because I think I'm convinced that a lot of people's defenses are like they're very much in control of them, they're aware of them. But I know there's a voice in their head that wants to talk. I know that their spirit, if you will, wants to communicate with me, wants to get help, wants to change something. And all the other voices are much more ambivalent about the whole counseling process. You're trying to link your spirit, the Holy Spirit, with their spirit that wants something good to happen. So you're trying to connect with that part in some way and empower that voice to have a little more control or power or a little more of a voice inside them. Well, I was on a track and just lost it. Say it again?
You're stopping short, like you're tinkering to get new information.
Yeah.
And so you got her to do a thing, but what information did you get?
Well, I didn't necessarily get new information. What she got was new information. Imagining what she could write, which she had never pictured herself doing before. So she went from, I don't know how to get below this, to this exercise helped me because you started writing for me and I didn't like what you were writing in my name. Now I'm starting to write myself just because I'm making sure you understand me if you're this woman. And what we end up with is a letter that you didn't know you were going to write when you came into the office. And now you have a letter that you have to decide what you're going to do with it. Part of this is you want to get around their conscious defenses. So a lot of good tinkering exercises. This is why I do role play. Like lots of times, I will have somebody, when couples come in, if you and your wife came in and you're telling me what's going on, and you say, there's a story that'll illustrate this, and I might stop and say, if I can tell they're comfortable, I might say, all right, what's your wife's name? Jen. Alan, I want you to tell the story as if you're Jen, and Jen, you tell the story as if you're Alan. Which often puts the person off a little bit, like, and why would you do something like that? And inevitably people go, why do we have to do that? I don't want to do that. Like, that's weird. Why can't I say what two things. I want to know how well Alan understands Jen, because at the end of this role play, where they describe the conflict or whatever, I'm going to say to Jen, how did he do playing you? And I'm going to say to Alan, how did she do playing you? I'm partly assessing how much they have empathy for each other. How do they play? I'm also, again, trying to get them around their own defense. Because if Alan tells a story, whether he knows it or not, he's going to be defending himself. Jen's going to do the same thing. If I make him Jen, he doesn't have to defend Alan. he's trying to explain or portray Jen. So you're getting rid of a defense just by the role play. I also often have people, this is a tinkering thing that just happened to me in college. When I was 18, I started talking to Jesus like he was an imaginary person in my room. And I would write dialogue with Jesus. And I would imagine what he would say to me, because I grew up in Young Life. It's very Christ gospel oriented. I didn't know beans about the Old Testament, but I knew a lot of Jesus stories. So I could imagine, and I took liberty. Nobody told me I shouldn't do this. I could take liberty thinking how Jesus would answer some of my basic questions. And I could visualize having a dialogue with him. Even now, the clients who know that about me, they know there are times I will look at a chair in my office. And they will know, if they've heard this before, they know I'm actually seeking him out. I'm trying to, like, Jesus, you're a better counselor than me. What do you want to do here? That's me trying to help me get past my defenses and get me out of the way. But I will have people role play Jesus, because either I'll play Jesus, but I'll try, if you came to see me and you presented your problem and I said, let me play Jesus, but I'm going to play Jesus like I don't think you think he would be, just to see what happens. Again, like in the Gospels, I'm going to see if I can sort of surprise you with his response. More likely, I will say, Lynn, you play Jesus. I'm going to play you. If I know your story well enough, I'm going to ask some of the questions you're asking. And you have to play, you're revealing what you believe Jesus is like through your answers. Now, Christians are funny about this. A lot of Christians just they feel like I can only say 5 or 6 things that I'm sure Jesus said in the gospel. So it's like one of those pull dolls where Jesus always says, fear not, or I love you, or I'm with you, or trust me, or something pretty lame. So if Lynn's Jesus does that, I would say, okay, Jesus, you're not helping me here. You're not answering my question. I asked you a specific question and you're just telling me to trust you. That's not good enough. Give me more. The truth is, if you look in the Gospels, Jesus is not predictable. He doesn't repeat himself. He certainly doesn't quote the Old Testament as a solution to somebody's situation. He's very creative, very interactive, very appropriate, very timely in what he says. So when you're role-playing Jesus, part of this is to get the person actually out of themselves and imagining, and sometimes this is what I wish Jesus would say. And if a person's honest, they'll say, I'm just saying what I want him to say. I don't know what he would say. Take a guess. But I'm trying to see what's the Jesus, who's the Jesus that you're communicating with, that you're trying to trust. Because I know if you're a believer, part of your movement, part of you getting out of this is experiencing something more vital and something more helpful from the Spirit or the Lord. And role-playing that just brings that more to the surface. Again, I'm just very committed to getting around whatever defenses you can to get fresher, more honest, unguarded, unexpected data out on the table. Does that all make sense? All right, closing thought. We don't talk about it. I used to have a little bit of a discussion about why I think what we do here is biblical counseling. When I teach at RTS, I have to go into detail because there's lots of definitions of biblical counseling. Most people come into LCI, I don't think they particularly care. But what I want to say, because I think the lion's share of what you do in counseling, once you begin to have a rapport with someone, the bulk of what you're doing in counseling is listening, assessing, because you're always assessing, because you're getting into more and more rooms, and eventually you're getting to where the action is, and tinkering, and some gentle exposure. That's 90% of what counseling is. And the solutions or the choices that eventually come out in front of me and the client, which is what we get to in the major change, those choices eventually, if they get that far, those choices become apparent. But the bulk of what we do is this, really is this tinkering in an empathetic, safe relationship but it's exploring and pushing and trying to get around defenses and that sort of thing. And I can't think of anything more biblical to do with somebody than that. Many people think biblical counseling is presenting scripture to people and letting the scripture be the change agent. That's not what we're presenting. From my perspective, the scripture is more aimed at me to get me to think like the Lord and operate like him. There are times the scripture comes up. It doesn't mean I'm opposed to using scripture. It's just not the primary methodology. It is the primary methodology for me. How do I interact with somebody like you do? That's why studying the Gospels in particular feels very helpful in terms of how do you interact with people in different situations, and how wide a range can you have? And how do you deal with whatever your choices are, what they provoke in the relationship? How do you keep the connection? That's why all these episodes where Jesus seems harsh or rude, in many cases, I know the person says, I know what you said, but I know you're actually for me. It's what the woman at the well, what we saw 2 weeks ago. Jesus has that ability to say, I'm for you, but I'm not going to be predictable. That's like that line in C.S. Lewis. Is the lion safe? No, but he's good. Now you have to be safe, but you also want to be unpredictably good. That's part of what provokes the change and actually builds the relationship and builds hope in the person. And tinkering is the best thing I know to help people begin to feel unstuck.